joining me. I am Mark Stewart, and I like interviewing provocative guests. Not necessarily big titles, but people who are thoughtful, passionate, assertive. My guest today is all three. He's John Demitrus from West Hartford, and he has an eye to what's going on in both suburbs and cities in a way that a lot of people should hear. So, John, welcome and thank you.
Mark, thanks so much for inviting me to your podcast. From the moment I heard that you were thinking about doing a podcast, I wanted to be a guest. So thanks for taking time and inviting me on your podcast today.
Well, good to have you. Let's get into it. Tell us about your business background of late.
For the last 5 years or so, we've owned a business inside the city of Hartford in the North End. The North End is one of the most challenging areas in Hartford from a perspective of economic development. This area has not had a lot invested in infrastructure and policing and community events. The North End still doesn't have that investment in economics and just social programs that's needed to lift up that area. So somewhat, I don't want to say ignored, but certainly not leading the pack as, hey, this is an area that's a model for investment, growth, giving people options for food options. You know, we hear about this term about food desert where there's not fresh vegetables or fresh meats available. That really does signify what's happening in the North End. So there's fewer options. The transportation options are limited, and it's really a microcosm. It's segmented by a river, a highway, a park. So it's hard to get out of the North End. And that's where we've got our business, and it's very challenging to live there and do business in the North End of Hartford.
Now, John, what keeps a grocery store? I mean, you don't need to have, what it seems like you need is a decent number of people, and there certainly is a lot of people. All families need to eat, but all you see are little mom and pop size stores, no big stop and shops, and I don't think a single Walmart is in that part of Hartford, is there?
Yeah, if you think about that microcosm, that little square that's segmented off of the other larger neighborhoods, rivers, highways, parks that exclude them from having access to maybe some of the bigger areas to the north or to the west. What you have is you've got the inability from people from the north and the west to come into the North End of Hartford to shop. So if a large chain grocery store is going to exist in the North End, it's hard for the 4, 5, 6,000 people that reside in that zip code to support it. They actually need a lot more numbers. Now, this is an area that ownership of single-family homes or personal property is down in the 20 to 30% range. That means 70% of the properties are rentals owned by landlords, whether they're local or not. So you've got people that are paying high numbers of rent. There's not a lot of money left over, eating, things that are processed. So once you start eating that type of food, your body craves those preservatives, those chemicals, and that's what you're used to. So having an option for a vegetable, broccoli, cauliflower, your body doesn't crave it once you've really been on that preservative track for a while. So part of it is what you're used to consuming versus what's available to you. And it's really hard if you don't have your own vehicle to get out to some of the shopping centers to experience the bigger places with more options.
Because to get to a shopping center, you're actually now leaving almost all of Hartford, right? You have to go to West Hartford or across the river to East Hartford to get to that many store shopping center, right?
Or if you want to get to the next best thing, you're going north into Windsor, which is still, how many buses do you have to take? You may have to jump on a bus in the North End of Hartford, take it down to Hartford, transfer, and then take another bus out to Windsor.
Now, I thought that Connecticut itself had tried to put a good amount of emphasis, money, in reviving Hartford. There's a education corridor around Trinity College. I thought there was a direct outreach to revivify North End of Hartford. What's happened?
I'm probably not the best person to ask. I can tell you if they're making an investment down, let's say, um, Farmington Avenue or Park Street, that those areas are being revitalized. So we're seeing Hartford as a whole. Yes, I think Hartford is an up and coming city, but the North End still hasn't had that investment. Now, with maybe the new ballpark that's sitting right just north of the city, you can see that in the next few years, in the next decade, maybe that's the one place where that's been left. Maybe that's the next phase of investment. But today, you still don't feel it in the North End. You see crumbling streets, um, unusable sidewalks, transportation is a challenge, and dwindling businesses.
So what's the difference then that with Park area, you said for Albany, getting better, why there versus this even larger swath in the North End?
Well, I think it comes down to politics. So previous mayors were supported by very large lobbying groups that occupy certain parts of the city. I'm not a lifelong Connecticut resident, so I don't have the experience of watching what has happened today. We're not seeing it in the North End. There's not a lot of jobs, so we've got fairly high unemployment in the North End. We've got high rental areas. We've got high poverty rates, and it also, you know, there's a feeling that when people are released from incarceration, that a large number of people are being housed in the North End as well. So halfway houses or group homes, those occupy a large number of the North End residences. So you have people that are, when I say transient, I don't mean in a negative connotation. I mean, people that are being released from incarceration are they're getting out of jail or prison, and they're establishing themselves there the first couple of weeks that they're coming out of the system, only to move on to their next phase in their life, which is great because they're getting back into society. But a certain percentage of those people, there's a high recidivism rate. So again, the North End deals with that. And we can't ignore the large drug problem that we're experiencing here in the North End. So you don't have to walk very far to find discarded baggies, needles, and a large population that deal with addiction on a daily basis. Addiction by itself is not a bad thing as long as we can manage the needs of the people. Today, what we have is we've got incarceration as an option. Most of these people that are unemployed or limited employed and have addiction issues don't have options to go get the right treatment.
And once they get released, it's gotten much harder to even get a job. The kind of profiling that employers now, either on their own or because of other regulations, have to do, it seems like one offense knocks you out of like a majority of job paths.
Right. And add in the fact that we're going to drug test people that really have addiction issues. So we're going to penalize them for having that addiction, that illness, that are struggling with that by firing them. So if they have an addiction issue, they're going to feed that addiction one way or another.
John, is the revitalizing of even a small neighborhood in Hartford, is it dependent on government action?
Well, we do see how government benefits local neighborhoods in Hartford when there's investment in infrastructure. So cleaning up the roads, making the sidewalks brighter with better lighting, increasing public transportation allows people to move around better, having good utilities. That allows people to move around the city much easier. I do think that the role of government is to make good laws. And today we have this drug war, and I will rail against our current drug policy because it's not helpful. We've got people that are decent Americans dealing with addiction, whether they're injured on the job and the doctor prescribed them opioids and then cut them off so the addiction doesn't go away, the treatment is not offered, so they move to street level narcotics, which is really the same molecule and the same pharmaceutical makeup as what we're selling from the large pharmaceutical companies, but we can get it at the street level. And hey, listen, it's available everywhere. And we penalize these people. And if we're really going to lift up our most vulnerable communities, we need to take a more realistic approach to dealing with drug addiction. It's not firing, it's not incarceration. We actually have staff on hand that we know that they've got addiction issues, but they manage them and we help them with it. I think that's the most compassionate thing that you can do. Is I understand you've got an addiction and you still use, but you know what? You come to the job every single day and you function at a high level. Fantastic. We're going to work with you to make sure that you're successful. And I think that's what government can do. They can support employers that want to find good people.
You being one of these employers, I'm sure you've had a relapse among your employees. So what is your reaction with a first-time relapse into a addiction?
You know what? We haven't. These are people that have been using for 20 and 30 years. They know their bodies, right? So a relapse is the definition of that is, hey, I'm using again. But what we find is we actually find people that have been active users that use it, in a sense, responsibly, and their bodies are used to it. So they come to work 6 a.m. They come to work at 2 p.m. They're on time. They work well with the public. They get their job done, and it's a win-win. They have employment. We have happy customers. I mean, to me, that's the compassionate action, rather than saying, hey, you should not be using that substance, that molecule. Nope. Tell you what, we're going to be understanding, and we're going to understand that these are addiction issues.
What
We're
do
going to
they
work
have
through
to
them.
do to prove to you to get hired in the first place when there's a known addiction that they were treated for? They weren't on the job well in their prior job, but now they're coming to you, hey, I want to work. What are the ground rules for taking them on?
I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, because there's a stigma associated with addiction, people aren't forthcoming during the interview process. Could you imagine? Hey, Mark, I want to come work for you, but you should know I've got a heroin addiction. Mm-hmm. Ooh, that doesn't work anywhere else. Why would they even consider that it would work with me? But once they come on board and we start to trust each other as employer and employee, some of these things come out. And when you earn that trust and somebody can say, hey, John, I want you to know, yeah, I do have this addiction issue, but I'm working through it. You can see that they're trying. You can see that they work out well. The only reason I would probably not keep somebody is if they weren't executing the job the way it's supposed to be done, right? So it's a performance issue, not a what do you do recreationally after you're off the clock, because that's none of my business, and I don't want to be involved in that. So whether they smoke something, take a drink of something, or do something else, it's none of my business. I only care about during the hours that they show up and they leave, what do they do while they're on the job?
John, addiction or not, tell us about work responsibility, which I hear over and over from employers is lacking, especially among young people and often among urban people. So young urban people, it's a double whammy, and it seems to keep them from getting hired where there's jobs. And I know that might not be North End, but just go to Windsor, where there's manufacturing companies begging for workers, Berlin, other tech companies that just can't staff well enough. Tell us more about how kids who might not be used to job-related responsibilities get better and become more employable.
How do young kids become more employable? I think it starts with education. So having good schools, having access to good role models, I think it starts there.
Mm-hmm. Now, their parents, most of them are holding jobs, okay? And they want good for their kids, but it seems like something is a disconnect with well-meaning parents, hardworking, and yet kids not having the same diligence to be successful right out of the gate.
Well, you know, I don't know if I want to blame parents for this. Part of it might be culturally, right? So we live in a world where everybody wants to be an NBA superstar or an Instagram model, and these are unrealistic expectations. As a parent of four children, I can tell you that having a realistic conversation with a child that says, "Hey, listen, you may not be the next Michael Jordan or Peyton Manning, so study." So
Mhm.
culturally, I think we need to focus on the things that are the most foundational and important things that get help our children be successful. So it's not that, hey, I'm going to post things to Instagram and become a billionaire. It just doesn't happen. And I think too often we're focused on the wrong things as a culture.
Have you had any employees or customers who have gone to suburban schools, live in Hartford, but go to suburban schools and now are working for you part-time?
No, no, I don't. But I do hear from parents that frequent our businesses that they do. I'm not sure what the right term is. Is it bus? You know, they send their kids to West Hartford, or
It's a long bus
obviously,
ride.
or the parents drop them off. You know, we live in a society where half of marriages fail, right? So there's mom and dad often not living in the same household. So mom or dad might be living in Hartford, the ex-spouse or parent might be living in another town, whether it's Newington or Avon, and their child can go to one of the more suburban schools outside of the city. I do hear a lot about that. And sometimes these kids will travel even down to Berlin, which can be what, a 35, 40-minute ride every single day back and forth just to be in a good program. Um, we're a small operation. We've got 4 or 5 employees, and most of my employees are over 40 years old. So we the nature of our business, we don't hire a lot of kids. We just don't have that many openings for younger part-time people after school work. That's just not the nature of our jobs that we offer.
You might be a good advisor here, but it might be so macro it's beyond anybody. My mom grew up in the north end of Hartford.
Yeah.
And she would relate that up until she was in her 30s, and this would take you to the 1960s, Hartford was a gem. Hartford was wealthy, robust. People from suburbs wanted to come to all parts, north, central, south, and west end. Can you determine what went awry for really one section of Hartford?
Not really. You know, I, I didn't arrive on the scene in Connecticut until '97, and I didn't get involved in being in the North End until 2014. So by the time I showed up, uh, that urban decay that happens to a lot of older cities has already happened, already taken hold onto different towns and sections of towns. So I'm probably not I don't have the perspective.
Mm-hmm. All right. So just wondering if you have experience with people who have toyed with, I'm in the North End, but I actually want to move to one of the suburbs, and what you see them facing.
Yeah, I was actually in my business last night, and I came across a family, a husband and wife. Her name is Diane. They moved out to Manchester a few months ago, but they always come back into Hartford to do business at our business. Um, the general comments is Manchester's quiet. I miss the North End, but it's just too crazy here. There's just too much bad stuff that happens. So we're happy to be gone, but we miss it. And people love Hartford. And I don't want to make this conversation about Hartford. I think this is happening in a lot of older cities all around America where you've got decay or general apathy about investing in certain areas, and they fall apart, and the jobs are gone, there's food deserts, the transportation could be better.
Well,
Our
we're going to have you for another conversation because I know how versatile you are. So, on this regard, I'd like to thank you and give that as encouragement. Come back to Hartford, even if you have moved away. Come in to shop, come in to commune, come in for events. It's good for you and the city and the state as a whole. John Demitrus, thank you. I am grateful, and I think a lot of people hearing this are as well. I'm Mark Stewart, and it's very good to have you. I wish you a great weekend.
Thank you, Mark. Great being on your podcast.
Okay.